The espresso machine at the sunny patio cafe hissed, sending a cloud of bitter, roasted steam into the humid afternoon air. I leaned back in my usual wrought iron chair, listening to the rhythmic clinking of ceramic cups and the low hum of coastal traffic out on the promenade. The owner, Mateo, caught my eye from behind the counter and gave a quick, respectful nod, already pouring my standard single-origin pour-over without me having to ask. It was comfortable here. I knew everyone, and everyone knew me. Tucker Garcia, the guy who could get you the rarest high-altitude beans from the most inaccessible mountain ridges in the territory. I liked the recognition. It made the dust and the exhaust of the job feel worth it. Then the brass bell above the cafe door chimed, and the atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. She walked in like she belonged in a glass-walled high-rise, not a salt-worn coastal coffee shop. Margot Foster. Even after a long flight, she wore her authority like a tailored suit. Her navy trench coat was immaculate, her posture rigid, and her gaze scanned the room with a sharp, calculating efficiency. She didn't look at the pastry case. She didn't look at the ocean view. She looked directly at me. I sat up a little straighter, brushing a stray fleck of dried mud from the knee of my canvas work pants. Margot was 38, a decade older than me, and the CEO of the most stringent ethical import firm on the continent. She was also the only buyer who paid my farmers what they were actually worth. Right now, she looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. She walked over to my table, pulling out the chair opposite me without waiting for an invitation. "Tucker," she said, her voice tight, clipping the syllables. "The Monteverde geisha shipment didn't arrive at the port. It's missing." I frowned, the easy confidence I usually wore slipping just a fraction. "That's impossible. I personally oversaw the bagging at the cooperative on Tuesday. Diego drove the transport truck down the western logging road yesterday morning." "Diego never made it past the 3rd checkpoint," Margot replied, opening a sleek leather portfolio and sliding a printed satellite weather map across the table. "There was a localized washout. The road is gone. The truck is stranded at the upper way station. I'll call the port authority," I said, reaching for my phone. "They have heavy lift wreckers for this exact scenario." "They won't go," Margot interrupted, pressing her hand flat against the map. "Private recovery crews can't legally enter a washout zone without a civil guard clearance. If anyone goes up unofficially and gets hurt, the port voids our insurance and quarantines the shipment indefinitely." Before I could process that, her phone screen lit up with a red banner notification. She glanced at it, her jaw tightening. And to make it worse, the port just issued a severe weather advisory for the coast. That means their automated customs clearing windows can shift with a 2-hour notice under storm protocol. I looked at the thermal blobs on the map, mapping the altitude gradients in my head. "Margot, it's just coffee. We can tarp the truck, wait for the civil guard to clear the road next week, and bring it down when the mud dries." She pressed her fingertips against her temples, a small, telltale gesture of exhaustion. I had noticed the first time we negotiated a contract last year. "It isn't just coffee, Tucker. It's my leverage." She took a slow breath, composing herself. "Richard called an emergency board meeting for Friday morning. He's arguing that my ethical sourcing model is a logistical failure and hemorrhaging capital. If that specific micro lot isn't in the tasting room by tomorrow morning to prove the quality of the new cooperative initiative, the board will vote with him. He'll take over the firm, and he will gut every fair trade contract we have, including yours." The reality of the threat anchored me to the chair. Richard was her younger, viciously ambitious VP of operations. I had met him once. He wore expensive cologne and talked about crop yields like he was trading cryptocurrency, completely detached from the soil and the people. If he took over, the farmers I spent years building up would be ruined. "I flew down here to hire you," Margot said, leaning forward. "You know those mountains better than anyone. You have the equipment, and you have the reputation. I need you to find a way up there and physically retrieve my cargo before the Friday deadline." She paused, her eyes searching mine. "Will you do it?" I leaned back, resting my arm on the back of the chair. "Margot, you're looking at the only guy in this hemisphere who can pull a loaded truck out of a Class 4 mudslide without triggering a secondary collapse. Give me 2 hours. I'll make a few calls, get my crew, and we'll have your beans at the port by midnight." She didn't smile. She just tapped her pen against the leather portfolio. I'm coming with you. I stopped. No, you're not. It's a disaster zone up there. It's steep, it's cold, and the winch work is dangerous. You need to stay here where there's cell service and manage your board. My board is managed until tomorrow, Margot stated, her tone leaving zero room for debate. That cargo is the lifeblood of my company. I am not sitting in a cafe while you risk your neck for my business. I'm coming. I expected her to demand a phone call to the mayor, or threaten a lawsuit to force the civil guard's hand. Instead, she traced an alternative switchback on the topographical map with her pen, calm as a surveyor, and my next breath came out slower than it went in. She wasn't panicking. She was adapting to the constraints of the terrain. Fine, I said, standing up and tossing a few bills onto the table for Mateo. But when we hit the tree line, you listen to me. No arguments. Understood, she said, standing up smoothly. We walked out to my modified utility truck parked in the alley. It was a heavy-duty diesel rig, scarred by years of mountain rock and jungle vines, outfitted with a custom suspension and a 12,000-pound recovery winch. I opened the passenger door for her. She looked at the height of the cab, then grabbed the safety handle and pulled herself up with practiced efficiency. I walked around to the driver's side, pulling out my satellite phone. I dialed Leo, my lead mechanic and outfitter, expecting him to drop everything and prep the secondary recovery gear like he always did. Leo, it's Tucker. I need the flatbed and the heavy rigging at the base of the western logging road in 30 minutes. Static crackled over the line. Can't do it, Tuck. Leo's voice came through, sounding strained. The civil guard just physically locked down the valley access. Concrete barriers. Nobody goes up. And listen, the Port Authority is acting jumpy with the incoming pressure system. Keep an eye on the clock down there. I put the phone in the center console and gripped the steering wheel. My reputation wasn't going to fix this. The easy way was gone. Problem? Margot asked quietly. The main road is barricaded by the guard, I admitted, hating the sound of failure in my own voice. My crew can't get through. She just opened her portfolio again, turning the topographical map toward me. Then we use the old mining switchback on the eastern ridge. Could your truck make it up that grade? I stared at the map. The eastern switchback was a nightmare. It was unpaved, prone to rockfalls, and steep enough to burn out a transmission. But it bypassed the civil guard checkpoint entirely. It's risky, I said, my mind already calculating tire pressure, fuel weight, and suspension travel. It'll add 4 hours to the climb. And if we slip, there's no guardrail. Can you drive it safely? Margot asked. She wasn't challenging my pride. She was genuinely asking for a professional assessment. I looked at the lines on the map, mapping the torque curves in my head. Yes, I can drive it. Then let's go, she said, folding the map. You do realize you just negotiated with a mudslide, I said, putting the heavy truck into gear and pulling out of the alley. She snapped her seatbelt into place. And you just invoiced it. The drive to the eastern ridge took an hour of tense, quiet highway driving before the pavement ended. The moment we hit the gravel, the truck began to vibrate violently. I engaged the four-wheel drive and locked the differentials. The air grew steadily colder as we climbed in altitude, the humid sea breeze replaced by the sharp, biting chill of the mountain pine. I focused entirely on the road, reading the grooves and ruts in the dirt, choosing the exact line for my tires to maintain traction. Margot sat in the passenger seat, gripping the safety handle above the window. She wasn't complaining about the violent jarring of the cab, but I noticed her jaw was tight. I reached over and adjusted the climate control, turning the heat up slightly on her side. I didn't say anything, and neither did she, but I saw her shoulders drop a fraction of an inch as the warm air hit her. 2 hours into the climb, the sky bruised purple with incoming clouds. The switchback narrowed until my outside tires were barely a foot from the sheer drop-off. I kept the RPMs low and steady, refusing to let my focus drift. Richard has been planning this for months, Margot said suddenly, breaking the long silence. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying strain. He started building a coalition on the board in October. He leaked a false financial projection last week, claiming our direct trade premiums were causing a deficit. I spent 3 days auditing our own accounts to prove him wrong, but the rumor is already out. I kept my eyes on the road, shifting down as we hit a particularly steep grade of loose shale. Why didn't you fire him? Because he's the founder's nephew, Margot replied, a bitter edge to her tone. And because he controls a 30% voting bloc? If I move against him without undeniable proof of our profitability, he turns the board against me entirely. I have to beat him on the ledger. I have to show them the physical product, the quality, and the margins. If I lose. She trailed off, looking out the window at the fog rolling in. If you lose, you walk away, I said bluntly. You have the skills. You can build another firm. I don't want another firm, Margot said, turning to look at me. I built the supply chain for this one. I vetted every farm. If Richard takes over, he'll squeeze the cooperatives until they break. He'll source cheap, commercial-grade beans to inflate his quarterly bonus, and your farmers will go bankrupt. The blunt truth of her statement hit me hard. She wasn't just fighting for her ego. She was fighting for the people I cared about. He's not taking over, I said, my voice hardening. We're getting that coffee. We reached the summit of the eastern ridge just as the rain started. It was a cold, driving sheet of water that immediately turned the dirt track into slick clay. I flipped on the heavy overhead light bars, cutting through the gloom. The upper way station was a mile ahead, down a gradual slope. As we rounded the final bend, I saw the transport truck. It was a 10-ton flatbed, listing dangerously to the left. The washout had taken a massive bite out of the road, and the truck's rear dual tires were sunk deep into the mud, mere inches from the collapsed edge. Diego, the driver, was sitting in the cab, looking miserable. I parked my rig a safe distance back, on solid bedrock. Stay in the truck, I told Margot, unbuckling my harness. I'm helping, she countered, reaching for her door handle. Margot. The mud is knee-deep and unstable, I said firmly, keeping my voice level. I need to assess the sheer strength of that edge before anyone walks near it. You sitting here is the safest thing for the operation right now. Please. She hesitated, looking at the treacherous ground, then nodded once. Be careful. I stepped out into the freezing rain. The cold immediately bit through my canvas jacket. I walked carefully toward the flatbed, testing the ground with a heavy steel probing rod I kept in the back. The mud was thick, but there was solid rock about 2 feet down. Diego rolled down his window as I approached. Tucker. Man. I'm sorry, he yelled over the sound of the rain. The road just gave way under me. It's all right, Diego. You kept it upright. That's what matters, I shouted back. I walked to the rear of the truck, inspecting the cargo. The Geisha microlot was packed in heavy grain pro bags, sealed tight against the moisture, strapped down securely to the wooden pallets. The cargo was safe, but the truck was stuck hard. I spent the next 40 minutes executing a complex rigging setup. I attached a heavy nylon snatch block to a massive, deep-rooted pine tree on the high side of the road, running my winch cable through it to double the pulling power and change the angle of the drag. I waded into the mud, attaching the heavy steel D-ring shackles to the front recovery points of the flatbed. My hands were numb from the cold, and the rain was relentless. But the mechanical logic of the work kept my mind sharp. I checked every pin, every strap, every angle. One snapped cable under this kind of tension could cause a catastrophic failure. When the rigging was secure, I signaled Diego to start his engine. I walked back to my truck, climbing into the driver's seat. I was soaked to the bone, mud caked on my boots and jeans. Margot handed me a clean microfiber towel from the glove box without saying a word. Her navy blazer was soaked through at the shoulders, the fabric darkened by rain and heavy with cold from when she had cracked the window to watch. I wiped my hands and face, then engaged the winch controls. All right, I muttered, feathering the remote. Slow and steady. The electric winch whined, taking up the slack. The heavy steel cable went taut, humming like a guitar string under the extreme load. I applied gentle pressure, coordinating with Diego as he spun his tires in reverse. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The mud held the flatbed like concrete. I watched the tension meter on the winch, pushing it right to the safe working limit. Then, with a loud, sucking sound, the mud released. The flatbed lurched backward, the rear tires catching the solid bedrock. I kept the winch engaged, dragging the heavy truck completely clear of the washout zone until it was sitting safely on the stable section of the road. I let out a harsh breath, my shoulders dropping. We had it. I keyed my radio. Diego, the cargo looks secure. The western road is blocked below us, so we're taking the eastern switchback down. You follow my taillights exactly. Do not deviate from my line. Copy that. Tucker, right behind you. Diego's voice came back, thick with relief. Next time, try not to park in a landslide, I added, putting the radio down. Diego laughed nervously over the static. Noted, boss? The drive down the mountain was slower, agonizingly deliberate. The rain made the steep descent treacherous, and I had to manage the braking for both my truck and the heavy flatbed following behind us. The adrenaline of the recovery was fading, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. By the time we reached the lower valley, the rain had stopped, but the sun had set, leaving us in total darkness. I pulled the convoy into the gravel lot of a small, isolated transit lodge I knew. It was a safe, well-lit place where drivers rested before the final push to the coast. We stop here for 4 hours, I announced, cutting the engine. Diego needs to sleep, and the brakes on that flatbed need to cool down. If we push it all the way to the port now, we risk burning out the pads on the final grade. Margot checked her watch, her brow furrowing. If we stop for 4 hours, we won't hit the port until 5 a.m. My board meeting is at 8 a.m. We will make it, I said calmly. I planned the route times. You will have your coffee in the tasting room by 7 a.m. But we rest now. She didn't argue. She trusted my logistics. We walked into the small lodge. It was warm, smelling of wood smoke and roasted corn. I ordered 2 black coffees and a plate of empanadas from the woman behind the counter, then led Margot to a quiet wooden table in the back corner. She took off her trench coat, draping it over the back of the chair. She looked exhausted, the sharp edges of her corporate armor finally softening. I placed my phone face down on the table, silencing the endless notifications from other brokers, giving her my full, undivided attention. You're shivering, I noted quietly. Just the damp? She said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic mug I pushed toward her. I'll be fine. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The tension of the mountain was slowly bleeding out of us. I watched her methodically review her notes in the dim light, admiring her relentless discipline. I heard Richard talking to one of the major investors last week, Margot said, her voice dropping lower, entering the space of a confession. He told them I was too sentimental, that I was letting personal attachments to the sourcing regions blind me to the financial realities. She looked down at her coffee. He thinks I'm weak because I care. He's an idiot, I said bluntly. Your care is the only reason the supply chain functions. If Richard tries to run this operation on a spreadsheet, the best growers will lock him out in a week. Quality comes from trust, Margot. You know that. She looked up at me, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. I do know that. It's just hard to remember when you're sitting in a boardroom full of men who only look at the quarterly profit margins. She took a sip of her coffee, then set the mug down, her expression turning serious. What do you mean? I mean us, she said, her voice steady but quiet. This partnership. If I walk into that boardroom tomorrow and win, my position is secured. But Richard is going to scrutinize every move I make. He's going to look for any weakness. And society. She hesitated, a shadow crossing her features. Society will judge us so harshly. If people realize I'm relying on a 28-year-old independent contractor to save my company, if they see how much I depend on you, they'll use it against me. They'll say I lost my professional objectivity. The words stung, not because she was insulting me, but because I knew she was right. Her world was ruthless, obsessed with optics and status. I was a guy who wore muddy boots and drove a truck. In her boardroom, I was a liability. My jaw tightened. I wanted to tell her I didn't care what they thought. I wanted to reach across the table and take her hand. But I kept my hands firmly wrapped around my own mug. I couldn't make a promise I couldn't enforce. I couldn't protect her from the whispers of her own peers. I'm not going into the boardroom with you, I said evenly, holding her gaze. I'm your logistics contractor. My job ends when that coffee is delivered to the tasting room. What you do in that meeting, how you handle Richard, that's your domain. I won't give them ammunition to use against you. Margot blinked, surprised by my strict boundary. She studied my face, looking for anger, but found only resolve. You're stepping back. I'm protecting your reputation, I corrected her quietly. You need a clean win tomorrow. No distractions. No leverage for Richard. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just looked at me, an unspoken weight settling between us. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay, we play it clean. At 1 a.m., my satellite phone buzzed against the wooden table. I picked it up, expecting Leo. Instead, it was an automated text from the port tracking system. I stared at the screen, the warning from earlier finally manifesting into a solid wall. What is it? Margot asked, instantly alert. The Port Authority just updated their cargo manifest system, I said, reading the text twice to be sure. Because of the storm advisory you mentioned earlier, the automated customs clearing window shifts entirely. It closes at 4:30 a.m. instead of 6. If the truck isn't through the main gate and weighed by 4:30, the cargo goes into a mandatory 8-hour quarantine hold. Margot went pale. 4:30? But we planned for 5. The deadline moved up, I said, already standing up and grabbing my keys. The time cushion was gone. If we missed the window, the coffee wouldn't make the tasting room, and Margot would lose the vote. Can we make it? She asked, grabbing her coat. I did the math in my head. It was a 3.5-hour drive under normal conditions. We had exactly 3 hours and 20 minutes. We have to, I said. We ran out to the trucks. I woke Diego, explaining the situation in sharp, rapid commands. There was no time for hesitation. We hit the highway hard. I pushed the heavy utility truck to the absolute limit of its safe operating speed, the diesel engine roaring in the deep night. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, anticipating every curve, every dip in the asphalt, calculating the braking distance for the flatbed trailing behind me. Margot sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the digital clock on the dashboard. 3:15 a.m. 3:45 a.m. 4:10 a.m. The industrial lights of the coastal port finally appeared on the horizon, glowing through the coastal fog. We hit the city limits at 4:18 a.m. I navigated the empty, rain-slicked streets with ruthless precision, taking the fastest industrial truck routes, ignoring the slower main avenues. We pulled up to the massive steel gates of the commercial port at 4:26 a.m. The customs inspector, a tired-looking man in a yellow vest, walked out of the booth with a clipboard. I rolled down my window, handing him the electronic manifest tablet. Tucker Garcia. The inspector scanned the tablet, then looked at the clock on the wall of his booth. 4:28 a.m. He nodded slowly, hitting a button on his desk. The heavy steel gates began to roll open. You cut it close, Garcia. Proceed to scale 4. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I looked over at Margot. She closed her eyes, her shoulders dropping in profound relief. We got it, I said quietly. By 6 a.m., the Geisha microlot was securely transferred to Margot's local distribution van. I followed the van to the sleek, glass-fronted corporate headquarters of Foster Imports in the city center. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale, golden light over the modern architecture. We parked in the loading dock. Margot's logistics team, alerted to our arrival, immediately swarmed the van, moving the precious bags of coffee onto pallets and into the freight elevator, heading straight for the tasting room. Margot and I stood by my mud-splattered truck. The contrast between my battered rig and her pristine corporate world had never been sharper. She was back in her element. She straightened her trench coat, checking her watch. 7:15 a.m. The board meeting was in 45 minutes. It's done, I said, leaning against the door of my truck. The coffee is upstairs. The roasters are firing up. You have your proof. Margot looked at me. The exhaustion was still there, but her eyes were sharp, filled with the formidable intelligence that made her a CEO. Thank you, Tucker. I couldn't have done this without you. The firm will process your payment by noon, plus a 50% hazard bonus for the recovery. The formal business language felt like a wall dropping between us. It was exactly what we had agreed upon at the lodge. Clean, professional, no ammunition for Richard. Keep the bonus, I said, my voice steady. Just win the room, Margot. Protect the farmers. She nodded, a flicker of emotion passing behind her eyes, quickly suppressed. I will. She turned and walked toward the glass doors of the building. She didn't look back. Her heels faded into the lobby. I reached for the gear shift and didn't move it. The engine kept idling, steady and pointless, like it was waiting for permission to leave. Upstairs, the board meeting began. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew exactly how it was playing out. Richard would make his move, presenting his sanitized spreadsheets, arguing for efficiency and commercial volume, and Margot would let him talk. Then, she would pour the coffee. I checked my watch. 8:45 a.m. The glass doors of the lobby slid open. Margot walked out. She wasn't rushing. She walked with a calm, measured pace, holding a single manila folder. Behind her, a few paces back, was Richard. He looked furious, his face flushed, gesturing sharply as he spoke to another board member. Margot stopped on the pavement, turning to face Richard. Even from the truck, I could see the cold, unyielding authority in her posture. She didn't just pour the cup in that room, she projected the margins beside it, showing the premium pricing against the direct trade costs, rendering his entire argument obsolete. She said one final sentence to him, her voice carrying across the quiet morning air. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw the result. Richard stopped talking. He stood there, completely neutralized, before turning and walking back into the building. Margot turned away from him and looked toward the loading dock. She saw my truck, still idling. She walked over, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete. I rolled down my window. You won, I said, stating the obvious. The board voted unanimously to reject Richard's proposal, Margot said, stopping beside my door. The ethical sourcing contracts remain fully funded. Your farmers are safe. Good work, I said, gripping the steering wheel. I prepared to shift into gear. The job was done. The boundary was set. Turn the engine off, Tucker, Margot said quietly. I stopped. I looked at her, questioning. Margot, you need to go back inside. You have a company to run. I run the company. It doesn't run me, she said, her voice firm. She looked at my mud-stained hands, then up to my eyes. At the lodge, I told you that society would judge us. I told you that people would say I lost my professional objectivity if they saw how much I rely on you. And they would, I replied honestly. You have to protect your credibility. Margot shook her head slowly. I spent the last hour in that boardroom proving my credibility with data, with margins, and with a product that you pulled out of a mudslide in the middle of the night. I didn't win because I played it safe. I won because I trusted the right person. She glanced at the glass lobby, where a few executives were watching through the windows, then climbed into the passenger seat anyway, leaving her folder on the dashboard like a flag. She said, "Society will judge us so harshly," Margot whispered, quoting her own fear from the night before. I looked at her sitting beside me, at the fierce, beautiful certainty in her eyes. The vanity, the need to be the local legend who didn't need anyone, dissolved completely. I didn't need the whole town to know my name. I just needed her to know who I was. I answered, my voice steady and absolute. Let them judge. I choose us always. Margot smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. First stop. My office, she said, settling into the seat. I'm writing you into the cooperative charter as our permanent field lead publicly. If anyone asks, tell them the CEO approved this logistics partner. My phone buzzed in the center console. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Mateo back at the cafe. Saw the port manifest on the local wire. Proud of you, Tuck. I put the phone away and put the heavy truck into gear. steering us out of the loading dock and into the morning light. I learned that I don't need to shrink myself to fit into someone else's life. Real love isn't about hiding who you are to avoid judgment. It's about standing proudly beside the person who values your true worth. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.